Good afternoon. Welcome. Lots of tough acts to follow today. We want to talk about diversity and inclusion in the entrepreneurship and tech space, but I don't think the lessons are only applicable to that space, because one of the things that I've been hearing throughout the day, and we've had a number of conversations at lunch and in other spots, is diversity and inclusion, in my opinion, is one of the defining issues of our age. It is a cross-cutting theme that we're seeing show up in every conversation, whether it's climate change or human trafficking or you name the issue, there's a diversity and inclusion element to it. And it's amazingly personal. For me, my brother is Black. It's been with me. He was adopted when I was 16 months old. He was 3 months old. He's been with me my entire life. So I've had a personal experience with diversity and inclusion. And I think for me, it's also personal because I'm the stat that everyone keeps referencing as the middle-aged white guy. And it's interesting because you have to have guys like me along on this journey to help be part of this movement, because it's going to take a village. And really that's what we're going to talk about here is how this village was, this community that was created among these three amazing organizations and these three amazing ladies. So Amy, I'm going to start with you to set the stage and tell us, how this all came about.
Absolutely. So for those who aren't familiar, Venture for America is a community and fellowship that really is mobilizing the next generation of entrepreneurs. And today it's all about partnership. That's been the theme from this morning, this afternoon. And we're here actually to announce a partnership called Operation 3 to 300, in which Venture for America, in partnership with UBS and Uber, and maybe other companies that start with UB, if there's any in the room. No, we have made a commitment to help 300 women and people of color launch businesses over the next 3 years.
That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about why you see this as critical and why now.
So the last several speakers have given us all the statistics, so we don't need to go into that. But Venture for America as an organization has this position of credibility. We've created a community that has helped launch more than 125 businesses over the last few years, and young people and ecosystems all over the country look to us as leaders. And so for us, our representation matters, and it's personal for me as well. I was a first-generation college student raised by a single mother, Pell Grant recipient, and someone gave me access. And so now I want to pay it forward and help other people have access and lower those barriers to entrepreneurship and wealth creation like we've been talking about.
Fabulous. Jamie, talk about why you all joined.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start with why we are doing this. I know that the stats and the figures and things like that, I'm going to bring up a few more. But by show of hands, how many people in this room were born in New York, Boston, or San Francisco? Okay, a fair number. Oops, okay. All right. So I did that in part because, 70%, in 2018, 70% of investment capital was deployed in only those three places. And so the rest of the country is competing for the remainder 30%, which is pretty absurd. Another highlight from 2018, $132 billion in venture capital, the rocket fuel for startups, was deployed, and as was said a few times, so 2%, about 2.2% went to female founders and less than 1% to founders of color. If you add up all of the female-founded startups that got venture capital last year, and this was an article that was in Fortune right after kind of the year ended, 10 billion less than the e-cigarette company Juul. So they had an investment of $12.8 billion last year. Female founders got $2.88 billion. So if you add up all those companies and all the things that they're bringing to the world, and they got 10 billion less than an e-cigarette company, I think you can see that it's not the case that the best ideas are the ones that make it. That is the myth of meritocracy, as we all know. And so the reason why we've been working with Venture for America, even in their earliest days, is because they recognized early on this opportunity to invest in talent and to build entrepreneurial ecosystems across the country and really could think of no better organization to work with on this effort. I think that people like to, I mean, maybe this is more of a California thing, no offense. People like to say, what would you do if you weren't afraid of failure or whatever? So I hate that. I prefer, what's more motivating, at least to me, is what would we do if we had everything we needed to have the impact? So for us, working with VFA and with Uber on this effort is a really practical way to develop the kinds of founders and the companies that we want to see. So I couldn't be happier to be here with you guys today talking about this. So thank you.
That's fabulous. Meena, tell us about how this lines up with the work you're doing at Uber and the wider D&I effort you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very excited about this partnership, and some of you may be thinking, like, kind of random, why does Uber care about entrepreneurs, other than the fact that obviously we are a tech company and a startup. And if you think about it, at its core, Uber is about entrepreneurship, right? That's core to our business. We, in terms of our platform, enable ordinary people to live the lives that they want to live and create their own lives on their own terms and achieve economic opportunity on their own terms, and be an entrepreneur in their own life. And that's on top of the thousands of driver partners who are actual entrepreneurs and small business owners. So in that way, it's core to our product, right? Literally core to our product. Internally as well, some of you may know this, but historically, Uber has been known to have an entrepreneurial culture, and it's actually what led me to Uber. I wear two hats, and as well as being the head of strategy and leadership, I'm also an entrepreneur right now on the side. I'm the founder of the Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign, and that's actually what led to me taking on this role. I was doing a partnership with Uber, and they recruited me, and I wasn't actually looking to go back into tech at that time, but what I had heard in talking to people who were at the company was that it had this incredible culture of entrepreneurship, right? That if you had an idea, if you wanted to be creative, you could go do it, and you would be supported by your manager and be supported by the company to go do that. So we know that in general terms that entrepreneurs having the opportunity to be in startups in the way that Venture for America is focusing on is good for us. And we also know that from the company side, having entrepreneurs as employees is really good for the business. They are innovators, they are creative thinkers, right? They are problem solvers. But from a D&I perspective, there's of course this threshold question about who has access to these opportunities. And I think what's very interesting as well about entrepreneurship as a general concept is that there's this notion that it's sort of this great equalizer, right? And that anyone can have access to it. And we've been talking about it all day long, and we know that that is not true. Most often the case it is not true. And when we talk about giving access and creating opportunities, you mentioned your personal story, Amy, and how you've been lucky to have these opportunities. Likewise, I'm a woman of color entrepreneur that Uber saw an opportunity with, and I was given that opportunity. And we are so excited to be partnering with you to do the same for women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color.
That's amazing. Jamie, you guys have the Project Entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're uncovering in terms of the barriers that female founders of color are facing and how you're addressing them?
Yes. So we started an effort about 4 years ago focused on really being an on-ramp for female founders of high-growth startups from across the country. And we had a chance to work with over 1,600 of those early-stage companies. And when you look at what has happened in the past 4 years to where we are today, there are definitely more programs and more events for entrepreneurs and for female founders, which is fantastic. But the thing that hasn't changed, which is a surprise to no one here probably, is the access to capital piece. That's why you hear so much conversation about it. Hasn't changed, improved in 20 years. And so when we took a pause to figure out how do we want to take our efforts to the next level, we decided this is the area that we really need to double down in. So it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to change. And so we want to focus on accelerating capital to female founders in our Project Entrepreneur 2.0. And we want the conversation also to move beyond venture capital. And I know that I'm the one guilty of bringing venture capital up already, but Kauffman Foundation actually released really interesting data recently around, 83% of all entrepreneurs are underserved, meaning that 1% is right for venture capital, another 16% get loans, but then the rest are left without financial products that actually make sense for them. And so I think if we're going to fundamentally change through efforts like 3-300 and Project Entrepreneur, we're going to have to increase the conversation beyond venture capital. It's not really right for everyone, and there's many paths to scale and growth, and we're going to need to address that. I think the second thing is so there's a founder that we've gotten to know really well. She was involved in our program, Stephanie Condiff. She is the founder of Leche Lounge. They're mobile lactation suites. Stephanie is a mother. She's from Oklahoma. She's from the Cherokee Nation. And she is a trained lawyer. And when she was leaving after her first kid and going on, traveling for work, she would often find herself having to, pump and stuff like that in restrooms. And I remember meeting her, and she was like, imagine eating a steak in a bathroom. Like, just thinking about that, I was like, no. And she's like, if companies want to retain their female workforce, and not all states require having, lactation lounges for nursing mothers, and bringing some dignity back to feeding our children, this is the company that she's building. And she's creating jobs on the Cherokee Nation. She wants to stay put in Oklahoma, but for someone like Stephanie, she's not interested in moving to the Bay Area, and she's figuring out what that path to growing her company. And this is the kind of company that we need in the world. So I share that because if you see many companies and founders who have what it takes to succeed but are unable to grow their companies, at some point, investment capital or the issue of accessing capital is going to be the thing that will allow them either to grow their company or to fall off a cliff. So there's many more of the Stephanies out there, and there's founders across the country, which is, again, part of why we've loved working with VFA, is because just a recognition that this talent is everywhere. And the reason why it matters so much is both about what we'll miss out in terms of innovation, but also what we've been talking about today, wealth creation. So part of what we want to do with Project Entrepreneur 2.0 is also to address a big barrier, particularly for female founders of color, the friends and family money, the friends, family, fools money that oftentimes is the money that helps build prototypes or the types of things that investors want and need to see. Because of the wealth gap in this country, it is much more difficult for them to get started. So I'm really excited to dig into something that I think is going to be really meaningful, and it's a hard thing to do, but I think for all of us who are supporting, which is so great to hear people talking about this so much, for all of us here supporting female founders of color especially, what we need to do is actually band together and build this whole lattice work of support that exists for other entrepreneurs if we're going to be really serious about seeing things change. So I'm excited for that. And anyone who is interested, we would love to connect with you. We're figuring out, we want to launch in the next few months, and definitely something that we want to partner with others on.
Amazing. Amy, talk a little bit about what specifically you have in mind for 3-300 and where we're going to go from here.
Absolutely. So I think of the barriers to entrepreneurship in sort of two categories. There's the cultural barriers, and then there are the structural barriers. And there are a lot of programs that exist once you've already decided to start a company. And there are a lot of things to teach, like K-12 entrepreneurial skills. But what we do is we actually bridge the gap from being a student to building a business, and we do that through apprenticeship. So when I think about the cultural barriers, there's the you can't be what you can't see. There's the fact that Our culture actually doesn't reward risk-taking. Young people know how to follow a syllabus and get an A, but no one's told them to take a risk, right? So how can we identify people based on their characteristics, their grit, their hustle, their resilience, their optimism, not their resume, not where they went to school, not even their GPA, and say, we're gonna take you because you share these values that we have, and then put you into an apprenticeship where you're gonna learn from someone who's already been down that road and see their trials, tribulations, successes, and failures, and start to really reshape that culture of achievement. And then on the structural side, a lot of people don't realize this, but millennials are on track to be the least entrepreneurial generation in American history. And the number one reason that they cite for why they're not starting businesses is student loan debt. So very specifically, we're gonna put resources to work to help ease the burden of student loans, because if you have a debt burden at 22, 23, 24, your choices are necessarily gonna be constrained. So we're gonna ease that, and then we're gonna directly put about $2 million of capital to work into the businesses that our fellows are starting. And we're helping them move from being an employee, an apprentice, starting that side hustle, that side business, while keeping your day job, frankly, keep that source of income so you don't need that investor capital right away, and then slowly start to build that business and then ultimately go full time.
That's amazing. That sounds really exciting. Meena, tell us a little bit more about, let me get this right, Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign and how that connects.
Yeah, so the Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign is a female-powered civic engagement platform. And I mentioned sort of the initial connection with me as an entrepreneur and how Uber saw that opportunity with me and how that led to my taking on the role there. But I think in terms of tying all of this together, there's 2 points I would make. One, that people often ask me sort of like, what's the magic, what's the secret to you building this, what people call now a movement, which I never set out to build something big, right? And my response is always that it's truly just about being an entrepreneur in your own life and applying that mindset to whatever it is that you're passionate about. And I know that sounds so cliche, but it truly is like finding that one issue, putting the work into it and dedicating your time and attention to it and focusing on it. But as I've looked at that from the perspective of somebody who's also inside a big company and thinking about how we build a culture to actually support the passions of our employees, to support their family obligations, to support them in all their different stages of life, I also recognize that we as companies have a responsibility to create opportunities for employees to have that fulfillment, right? And to tie this desire to have social impact, to do something good in the world, to do something entrepreneurial to our business, and to recognize, as I said earlier, that entrepreneurs make really good employees, right? Those are some of the best employees you're gonna have, and to really create a culture that supports that. So that's one thing. I think the second is, and I'm happy that, Jamie, you were talking about women of color entrepreneurs in particular, which is that when we talk about D&I and we talk about women and people of color, unfortunately, women of color are often left out of that conversation still, right? So when we talk about women, it more often than not, we end up talking about white women. And through the Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign, we've been very deliberative in focusing on and centering women of color and centering the distinct experiences of women of color. Beatrice talked about this earlier, which is that, I think in terms of our consumer holidays and recognition, we talk about Equal Pay Day. We were first focusing on General Equal Pay Day, which happens in April, but that includes all women, including Asian women and white women, and happens in April, as I said. For Black women, they don't achieve equal pay until this year. It won't be until the end of August. For Latinas, it's not until the end of November. And so when we talk about opportunity and when we talk about access and true representation, we really have to speak to this directly and say that this is something that we are committed to and that we're prioritizing. But not only that, we know that when we do focus on women of color and their distinct experiences, that we necessarily help everyone else. And I'm very proud that at Uber, we are doing just that. We'll be releasing our diversity report soon, and it's something that is a key message for us, and really saying that we're gonna look at this from the lens of intersectionality and understand that there is a cumulative impact of discrimination when you're both a woman and you're Black and maybe you're queer and a member of the LGBT community, that all of this piles up, right? And we have to recognize that and recognize that there is a distinct type of approach and support that we need to provide for those communities.
That's amazing. Amy, besides supporting VFA, which we invite everyone to do, how can other people, what's the call to action here?
I think mentorship is really the most important thing, right? And I've heard you can't be what you can't see about 1 million times today. So it might not be entrepreneurship, but find someone who's a change maker in your community, because everyone here has enough social and political capital to be in this room, and really help pull them forward and help them figure out how they can even sort of know that risk taking is possible.
That's amazing. So I'm going to take everybody back to, early middle school lessons. Horatio Alger is this writer in the early 1900s and wrote this rag to riches story. It's a really famous part of the American mythology. And it's all about these kids who grew up on the streets and were able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Those of you who know this phrase, used to mean something very different than it does today. It means to pull yourself up from difficult circumstances. It originally started as an impossible task. You cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's impossible. And sadly, we see that to be the case now. What we need are helping hands. We need models to guide our way. We need support systems. And luckily, we have 3 ladies like we have on stage today and all of you to help do that. So thank you. And join me in thanking our panelists.